What if I told you that O.J. Simpson did not kill Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman?
So the case we're looking at today is a very famous case, the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson, who is the ex-wife of former professional football player and actor O.J. Simpson, to whom she was married to from 1985 to 1992. They have two children, Sydney and Justin. And the other person who was murdered, as Mr. Bogus mentioned, was Ronald Goldman, who was a waiter in a restaurant and friend of Nicole Brown Simpson. Those two were found murdered. I believe it was in June of 94.
94, yep.
Yep.
Trial was 96, yep.
So one thing I want to kind of briefly mention here with these cases that we are looking at, it's not an in-depth look at all the evidence of every single case. We could go on forever with those. We're just highlighting a few pieces of evidence that we think are, important in some way. And we just want to, give you our opinions for our students, and hopefully it will resonate with some of their thoughts and some of them trying to figure out these cases as we present them to them. So take it away, Mr. Bogus.
All right. So as the introduction said, one thing that a lot of people automatically think about this case is that when they hear O.J. Simpson, oh, he did it, he got away with murder. And the evidence we're about to show might not necessarily make you think differently, but one thing I want you to ponder as we're going through the evidence is that Nicole Brown Simpson, if you ever see pictures of her, was pretty physically fit, and Ron Goldman was pretty physically fit. He's even said that he did some modeling and stuff, so obviously he had to be in good shape for things like that. And that OJ, former football player, very arthritic knees, bad back, and things like that. How would he be able to brutally, not just stab somebody, but brutally murder these two people? So I do want to unpack that as we're going along and bring up a theory that his oldest son, Jason Simpson, might be involved. So some of the evidence we want to get into it is going to be EDTA, which we'll break down what that is. We're going to talk about a limo driver who was around. We're going to talk about a watch that Nicole Brown Simpson was wearing, and some other pieces of evidence. So where I want to start is with the watch. I'm going to share my screen now. And there was some discrepancy over this watch right here. It actually stops at 9:59. And a lot of people believed it was 9:59 at night because that was around the time they think when the murders happened. There was some conflicting reports that when this was found on her body that it was operable or inoperable or things like that. It made the police think that this could be the time when it happened. So maybe they wanted it to appear inoperable, like because of a brutal murder like this, it hit the ground, it broke, that's when it stopped. And that gives them a timeline, and the timeline kind of fit their theory. It could be 9:59 the next morning when these bodies are found, when a neighbor calls because a dog's barking and things like that. It could be 9:59 another time we're not really sure when it broke. We have no idea if this is even part of the timeline. So I wanted just to talk about that and give you other sides of it so that you can see that maybe what the police theory is not exactly accurate. Any comments on that, Mr. Smith?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is there is no doubt in this case that the police made some huge missteps. So we're not here to indict the police, but they definitely made some big mistakes in terms of washing some of the extra, what they thought was not Nicole Brown's Simpson's blood off of her back. They washed the body. It was just, there was a lot of things, and you'll talk about some of the blood mistakes that they made. But going through this, much like the John Bonet case, the mistakes that the police made may always make it harder to solve the crime, harder to solve the case, I should say.
Mm-hmm. So let's get in more of the blood. The next picture I want to show is down here, and there's spots of blood that are Ron's blood, Nicole's blood, and even OJ's blood in the Bronco. Now, that does not look good for OJ, but what his defense team and Johnny Cochran over here, who I'm a big fan of, did just a good job of being a defense lawyer in this case. One thing they brought up is that EDTA might be in the blood. So if I can get this, my screen's not working right now. Give me a second. There you go. EDTA. It's actually a chemical that they use to preserve blood in vials. It's used all the time. If you leave blood in a vial without any kind of chemical, it'll coagulate, right? Am I saying that right, Mr. Smith?
Yeah.
It'll coagulate and it will harden up, right? And obviously you can't retest it if it hardens up. So they put this chemical in it. And it's a preservative. It's actually even in other things, and we can even talk about this more and more. It's even in sauces and things that like fast food restaurants use so that they can obviously use those sauces for several days in a row. They don't have to just worry about opening a jar and having to use everything that day and then throw out what they don't use. So why this looks bad for the prosecution and the police is that when O.J. Simpson was beginning to be processed, and they took blood samples from him, then they went to the crime scene of Nicole Brown Simpson's apartment, and they brought his blood there because that's where the CSI truck with all the evidence they were collecting and some of the machines they're using to process, stuff like that, was there. And the defense team, Johnny Cochran and the rest of the Dream Team, found out about that, and they used that against him, saying, well, then if they brought O.J. Simpson's blood to the crime scene and they didn't have any other suspects other than him, they wanted it to be him, he was fitting their sort of timeline that they made, then they planted the blood. And so this big thing that came up was, well, is there EDTA in the blood? Now, EDTA can be found in the blood, but our own body does make a little bit of EDTA, like we just talked about. Food, especially fast food, could have EDTA in it. And O.J. Simpson and his roommate, Kato Kaelin, did say that they had some Big Macs that night, right before the timeline of all this starting like that. So if he ate Big Macs and either had sauce on his fingers and had blood on his fingers, or it was just long enough to digest in his system, he could have had EDTA in there. So it's either very relevant to the case or irrelevant to the case. You have any comments on that, Mr. Smith?
Well, that's going to come up in another case that we look at with the Stephen Avery case, whether or not there's the presence of EDTA in a blood sample may or may not indicate that it was planted. Because if EDTA is inside of a test tube and used to store blood, and then you find the same EDTA chemical in a blood sample that you find in a vehicle or wherever in a crime scene, how did that EDTA get there? Because it's not naturally found in high amounts in the human bloodstream. Unless, of course, you're eating some sort of chemical, a substance like sauces and things like that. But it's really, it depends on the amounts of EDTA. But here we have a case in the 1990s, and we're going to see a case in the 2000s that, once again, the Stephen Avery case, that is a lot about EDTA.
Good. So the last part, I think, or one of the last parts we want to talk about is the limo driver, because this is pretty compelling. So take it away, Mr. Smith.
Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen here, and I want to show you a diagram that came up in basically the trial where the limo driver, there was so let me set this up for you. So basically, OJ was set to fly out that night, the night of the murders, somewhere around 11 p.m. And so there was a limo driver set to take him to the airport. And so that limo driver is pulling up, and the name of the limo driver is Alan Park. And no pun intended for limo drivers, but his name is Alan Park, and he basically pulls up, and he realizes he can't wait for OJ in this area of the driveway. The driveway is sort of there's an entrance here and an entrance here. There's a gate that's here. So there are a couple different entrances to OJ's residence. Remember, he is a movie star. He's a former football player, Hall of Fame football player, Heisman Trophy. So the dude had a lot of money at that point in time. And so limo driver pulls up and is waiting for him, and it has the lights on, and rings in, no answer, rings in the intercom, no answer, and basically is waiting there, and is very, starting to get antsy about, we're going to be late if he doesn't come out pretty soon. So he testifies at the trial that he saw a figure, somebody, a person, walk across his, headlights here and into the house. And what the best of the ability of the police and the investigators was that when he was coming back from the murder, he parked the Bronco here. He realizes that the limo driver is probably waiting for him. He goes out through here, tries to go around the back of the house. That's when he possibly, if you believe the glove is planted, fine. If you don't, this is probably when he dropped the bloody glove, because one of the gloves was found behind his house. He bangs into the air conditioner unit on the back of Cato Kalin's, his house guest there, and realizes he can't go around that way. So he comes back and then realizes he's going to have to walk in the house this way. And that's when the limo driver sees him. So limo driver testifies that he saw someone walk into the house after he was, banging on the intercom. And then once they walked into the house, the lights go on. And then OJ comes on the intercom moments later saying, "Oh yeah, I overslept. Sorry. I was in the shower." He had some sort of excuse. And, his bags were all packed. They got him in the limo, drove him to
the bags were outside, right? The bags were outside.
Bags were outside on a bench or something, all ready to go when the limo driver, he let the limo driver in. And the limo driver pulls up and his bags were all ready to go. So it does lead to some speculation in terms of if his bags were there, did he oversleep? Was he in the shower? Or was he, coming back from a murder and trying to enter his house ever so quietly so that not to tip the limo driver off?
Yeah. So one of the final things, we mentioned the gloves. I think we should talk about them again, that you can see the picture behind Mr. Smith. That's OJ with the gloves on. It was a bad job at the prosecution to even have him try those on without thinking it through. When you are a lawyer, whether you're prosecution or defense, you got to think both sides. How are they going to use this against us? How is this going to look? You got to look at optics, all those kinds of things. And first off, they're leather. If there's any kind of wet substance like water, blood, whatever it might be on them, it will harden them or even shrink them a little bit. Also, because they were evidence in this case, they had OJ put rubber gloves on underneath. And you put rubber gloves on underneath, that's going to take up room in the fingers and hands. So if they're already a little shrunk, he's got those gloves on, it's not going to look like it's going to fit. The other thing is, he's an actor. He's in the Naked Gun movies, a bunch of Hertz commercials, things like that. He definitely played it up with look, it's not, I can't get him on. So that didn't help the prosecution's case with this whole situation. So add in the other things the defense said, well, there was racist police officers like Furman who maybe planted it on the property at Bundy residence, at Rockingham, things like that. It all does sound plausible.
He actually, in going back to the blood, one of the detectives brought a sample of OJ's blood to the crime scene. And again, you got many theories surrounding that the police were racist, or that they set him up, they framed him, whatever. But just a lot of things that were just out of the ordinary. You don't bring a suspect's blood sample to the crime scene. They said the reason why was because the the forensics testing lab was there. The guy that was in charge of testing the blood was there at the crime scene. It was in, we're talking about California in June, in probably what would have been 80 to 90 degree heat. You're keeping these samples in a, so lots of blunders, whether it be on the police side of things or the prosecution side of things, letting them try the gloves on. Again, and it comes back to what we always say in class, which is you can have a mountain of evidence, lots and lots of evidence. Probably one piece of evidence is not enough to convict anybody, especially if you have good lawyers. So you want a lot of evidence that ties this suspect in, a mountain of evidence, as we say. You can have all that, but if you don't, cross your T's and dot your I's and do everything you're supposed to do, from the 7 S's of the crime scene all the way up through the prosecution, you may not get a conviction. And that this is a perfect example of, it did seem like all the evidence was pointing to OJ. And of course, we know from the conclusion of this case that he did not get convicted.
Spoiler alert, he did not get convicted, yeah. So we should go right into our opinions. And I'm going to share my screen one final time with my opinion. And I already kind of mentioned this a little bit. And that is that I think OJ, because of the physical nature of where he was at age-wise, maybe had an accomplice. And I think it might be OJ's son, oldest son, Jason. And Mr. Smith's actually going to show a video in a little bit about OJ detailing what happened. And I think it makes sense that maybe there's an accomplice, or maybe there wasn't. First off, one of the pieces of evidence in the case was a black wool hat. You see a picture right here. Years previously, Jason owned a black wool hat. Now, does that put him at the crime scene? Not necessarily, but he does have a black wool hat. The other thing I want to point out over here where my cursor is that if you look at OJ and his son Jason, as Jason got older, he looked more and more like OJ. So any eyewitnesses that say they saw OJ here or there at Rockingham or Bundy or whatever at nighttime, maybe it was Jason, because they do look very similar in build and stature and even facial expressions, appearances, and things like that. So, OJ writes a book called If I Did It. He talks about Charlie theory. Charlie theory is this idea of an accomplice. Maybe that accomplice is Jason. All I really want to leave you with is that Jason and Nicole actually were very, very close, almost brother-sister kind of relationship instead of like a stepmom, stepson relationship. They used to go out clubbing together and having drinks together and things like that, because Jason was, by all accounts, an older stepson for her. So they were really close. And when he started his chef career as a cook, when he would get a new job, he'd always want Nicole to come and ask her to bring some family or friends over, like especially grand openings. And the night before she died, he did get a new job and he was having a grand opening, and he invited Nicole and she blew him off. And Jason and OJ didn't just look alike. They also shared a bad habit of having a really, really bad temper. And I don't think it's that far-fetched to believe that Jason got really upset that she blew him off, told OJ, maybe even drove by her place and saw Ron Goldman hanging out there, told OJ that this guy's hanging around, and push comes to shove, the next night they go there and they both kill Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson, or Jason helps OJ or something like that, because I find it hard to believe, with OJ being much older and having arthritis, things like that, him being able to take them both down so brutally by himself.
So I guess I'll pick up here. I can probably buy into the accomplice theory, whether it be Jason or in his book, and Mr. Bogus mentioned a book that I'm going to talk about a little bit. So after all of this, after OJ is not convicted of the murders and has pretty much depleted all his financial resources, he didn't have as much money. He needed a way to make money, and after his acting career kind of fizzled out because nobody wants to hire this guy who, by all accounts, seems like he might have been a murderer, even though he didn't get convicted of it. So he needed a way to make money, and he put out a book. He had it ghostwritten by another guy, and it was called If I Did It. Of course, the if you've ever seen the book, the if is teeny tiny word if, and then big I did it. And so in this book, he sort of hypothetically creates this situation of, if he did it, this is how it happened. And I'm gonna share my screen real quick here and show you a video clip of OJ, kind of, in his words, broad stroking the idea of if he did it, and this is how it would have went down. So I just want to show you this.
Charlie took the knife.
Yeah, in the book.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the back gate, you go through the back gate.
Yes.
And it was open or broken, or?
I don't recall.
Okay.
I go to the front and I'm looking to see what's going on. And I can see that it appears, like Nicole I had candles all the time. She really did, to keep her overhead down, I think. And music was on. And while I was there, a guy shows up. You know? So
Ron Goldman comes in the back gate.
Yeah. A guy that I really didn't recognize. I may have seen him around, but I really didn't recognize him to be anyone. And in the mood I was in, I started having words with him.
He says to you, "I just came by to return a pair of glasses. Judy left them at the restaurant."
Yeah, words to that effect, yes.
And
he was, I don't know if I believed it or didn't believe it. It was pretty much immaterial because, you know, I was more concerned about everything that was going on, you know, and was fed up with it, I guess. And
you get into a fight. Nicole comes out.
A verbal
fight.
Got a little loud, and by that time, Nicole had come out, and we started having words about who is this guy, why is he here, what's going on.
And she says, "This is my house. Get the F out of here."
Yes, and which I didn't like because, once again, this is the same person. And if you read the book, you'll see some things that happened in the 2 weeks leading up to this that were very, very irritating, you know. And I think Charlie had followed this guy in, wanted to make sure there was no problem. And he brought the knife. As things got heated, I just remember Nicole fell and hurt herself. And this guy kind of got into a karate thing. And I said, "Well, you think you can kick my ass?" And I remember I grabbed the knife. I do remember that portion, taking a knife from Charlie. And to be honest, after that, I don't remember, except I'm standing there and there's all kind of stuff around. And
what kind of stuff?
Blood and stuff around. You know, I hate to say this, but this is not
right.
Okay, so so it's hypothetical, but it's sure, if you listen to that, it sure sounds like he's remembering right up until that point. He doesn't remember, which is this. Yeah. So to sort of bring this all around, my opinion is that he went there to confront Nicole because probably somebody, whether it be Jason or someone else, was telling him that she was messing around, not acting in a manner that he thought she should be acting. He went there to confront her, sees Ron Goldman, assumes the worst, blacks out, and goes bananas with a knife. I could be persuaded to think that someone else helped him do this, whether it be Jason or someone else. But 100%, I think that he did this, and that he's guilty of these two murders.
All right. So there you have it. This is another episode of Case by Case. with the serial thrillers from Mr. Smith and myself, featuring O.J. Simpson this time. And what do we always say, Mr. Smith?
We solve them all till we solve them all. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.